Rabbi Gamliel Rabinovich brings down the story that there was a very modern, very progressive community in America that in there lived a 16-year-old boy that lived in this secular lifestyle. After he graduated high school with honors, smart guy, he ended up going into college afterwards, but he ended up doing college with yeshiva. He came home for Rosh Hashanah, and he decided that he's going to spend some time with his family. And he realized that he forgot to buy a machzor for the Rosh Hashanah prayers. And it was too late. All the Sfarim stores in that area was closed down. So he calls the community rabbi. He says, maybe you have an extra machzor lying around that I could use. And the rabbi looks into his Sfarim, his library, and he says, yeah, I happen to find a really old machzor. You could use it. His family recently got new machzor. Says, we don't need this one. So they give him this old machzor, and this is what he's praying for. He's praying with. During the break of Rosh Hashanah prayers, he goes and he started leafing through this very old, ancient machzor. And he sees he found an empty page at the end of the machzor. And right after that, there was a page that's written that it says a drasha, a speech before Tekiyos, before the blowing of the shofar. And it's written by Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum. And, he's starting to read it. Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum was a Satmar Rav. And this is when he lived in Hungary. He gave a speech about 80 years ago. And now this boy found this piece of paper, and he's thinking, he says, wait a minute. He says, who knows if even the Satmar Hasidim even know about this? He says he's reading now, and he started to study a speech that was given 80 years prior. He thought he's going to be reading about Rosh Hashanah. He's going to be reading about blowing of the shofar, reading about maybe tshuva, connecting to God. And he sees the majority of the speech is barely focused on shofar. All that the rabbi is focusing on is that during that time there was a terrible breach, that woman in modesty, that woman began walking around in public with her hair uncovered, and that's what the whole speech was about. It quotes a whole bunch of sources. The Gemara in Brachos, page 24a, speaks that a woman's hair is uncovered as considered an erva, and then he mentions the Zohar, that any woman that makes light of this is cursed. It goes on and on. The Shulchan Aruch goes on, says that if a woman's hair is uncovered, no one's allowed to make a blessing in front of this woman. He discusses at length this topic. After, this boy reads throughout all of this speech, he has this energy, this zealous spirit, boils up inside of him. He lives in a very modern community. He goes home, goes to his mother, and he says, listen, he says, you're not, you don't cover your hair? He says, I'm not sitting with you in the Yom Tov table. She's like, what are you talking about? She's like, and he starts explaining to her. Just learned from the Satmar Rebbe all the things that, the halachas. He says, you're sitting over here with your hair uncovered. I can't make a blessing with you. He gives all the curses, a whole bunch of terrible things. He says, I'm not going to sit with somebody whose hair is uncovered. So it's straight out halacha. The family was so shocked. It's a modern family, very progressive, very progressive community. This is not appropriate, from an enlightened person to speak like this. They tried to convince him, this is not accepted. The women of their town all dress a certain way. They dress just like everybody else. We're all very fine people. We're all good people. We're good Jews. Okay, so we don't dress like, in the olden days. But this boy, he said very firmly, he says, what do you mean? He says, the law is a law. He says, so they decide that they're going to bring him to the rabbi. They can bring him to the rabbi, let the rabbi talk some sense into him. They bring him to the rabbi, who himself was very progressive. His wife wasn't so particular in these, in the laws of modesty as well. So the rabbi, very eloquently, very persuasive, very good speaker, goes and explains to him, listen, this is the days of the olden days. We're in the new era. This is very different. It's still okay. Don't worry about it. Blah, blah, blah. Gives him the whole spiel. But this boy was a smart boy. He says, listen, the Torah doesn't change. The law is the law. The law says you have to cover the hair. The law says all these are the laws. I can't make a blessing. I can't, and he refused. As much as the rabbi convinced him, don't worry about it. Your mother, if she's not modest, it's okay. Don't worry about it. He would not budge. The rabbi goes over to the parents and says, listen, I tried. He's not budging. What could I do? So the mother said, listen, I'm not going to, I want my son, to spend the time together with me. I want my son to go and spend the meals together with us. Okay, so I'll cover my hair. She goes and she covers her hair. Her sister, the mother's sister, prays in the same synagogue. She sees, the next day, she's coming with hair covering. She says, well, what's up with this? Like, where are you going? She tells her the whole story. She says, my son, he saw this, he saw the paper, he got all this, we brought to the rabbi, it didn't work out. So the sister, after the whole story, the sister was inspired. She says, if that's really the case, I'm going to also cover my hair. So you're not going to be the only one in the community. I'll also cover my hair. And she started covering her hair. And making a long story short, it ended up, after a short period of time, the entire community started covering their hair. All the women over here. This is the power of Torah. This is something so amazing. You think about it. The Satmar Rebbe spoke about something 80 years prior, that again, in Hungary, during the war, pre-war, like what was the modesty lacking during those times? Like what were already okay, maybe there was a reason that he actually obviously spoke about it, but we didn't realize that his speech came into effect that an entire community 80 years later changed and covered their hair. That is the power of Torah. That is the power that has the power to affect 80 years later. And this is something so important, whether you're dealing with speakers, whether with writers. Sometimes speakers are very into okay, fine, I want to reach, and rightfully so, I want to reach as much people as possible. And maybe not always does, the speeches reach the volume that the speakers wanted to. But you never know. It could be 80 years later and it can change an entire community, because that is the power of Torah. And this is the power when you're going and you're trying to connect to God and you're learning and you'll be like, okay, wait a minute, maybe I didn't change anything. Maybe I didn't, I still don't have that connection. Don't worry. That can still come. That will come over time. All you need to do is you need to learn Torah. As we see from this story, that even 80 years later, I had the power to go and change an entire community. You want to connect to God. You want to connect to the mitzvos. You have to do it out of happiness. You have to do it out of love. You have to do it out of enjoyment. And there's one way and one way only. And that is, you have to rekindle your connection. And that is through Torah study, learning Torah. And it could take a month, it could take a year, it could take 80 years. But at the end of the day, you're going to see the connection.